Hello everyone. Welcome to this lecture on contemporary transnational news flows. This lecture is a part of your paper on News and Society Introduction. In this module, you will learn the development of the concept of transnational news flow. This will enable you to understand the debate surrounding the exchange of news amongst nations, the critical analysis of the North-South news flow in context of developed and developing countries, the role of the major news agencies in the transnational news flow, the demand of news world information and communication order, and the current status of news flow. To understand the process of news exchange at transnational level, the chapter engages the normative theories of press. Based on these postulations, you will read the working out of various international news agencies, the debate of center-periphery in their connection with developed countries, the demand for NWICO, the development of non-aligned news agencies pool in response of the monopolistic media, and the present nature of transnational news flow. It is pertinent to know the connection of colonial history with the growth of international news media to understand the media processes at international as well as domestic level. Therefore, the chapter is chronologically structured to describe the theories and concepts. Learning outcome. You will be able to understand the importance of transnational news exchange for the development of the countries. The conceptual understanding of free flow versus balanced flow is still relevant. After reading this module, you will be in position to critically analyze the transnational news media processes. Also, you will be able to identify and suggest the measures towards desired changes. Evolution and development of transnational news media. Today we are living in an information society where the economics, political and social affairs depend heavily on the processing, distribution and consumption of information. However, this is not a new phenomenon. We trace the process of information and news exchange, though mainly for economic purposes, throughout the historic times. Eventually, the control on news and information was seen as a tool for gaining political power. For instance, we see the advent of press in India, when British needed information exchange with their home countries along with their colonies including India, and how Indian leaders used the might of pen for freedom movement. The knowledge of international political affairs may rightly be called one of the factors which led the country towards independence, since our leaders were well aware of these events. However, when we talk about transnational media for masses, one has to understand why do we need it? Who has the control on the news? How the news is processed? What are the implications of the news we get at receiving end? To start with, we find the media technology at large is controlled by the developed nations. There are big 4 news agencies along with a few news channels based in those countries which control the international news business. The selection of information, news processing and the treatment given to the news, that is positive, negative or neutral, remains in center stage of debate related to the purpose they fulfill by producing that content. Moreover, the countries which have their own media systems do not own the indigenous technology so far and are still living under the shadows of the foreign technology providers, even in the post-colonial era. The coming section takes you to the detailed debates related to transnational news flow and their outcomes. Debates surrounding the news exchange. To understand the relevance of transnational news flow here, we engage with normative press theories. These theories define role and nature of news media as based on political systems of their respective countries. That is, authoritarian, libertarian, social responsibility theory, communist, and lately added democratic participant theory and development communication theory. While the authoritarian and communist theory of press indicate towards the restricted and controlled media processes, libertarian press theory defines the free market-based media of democratic societies. On the other hand, social responsibility theory tells us about the free press with responsibility towards society as against the pure profit basis. The other two theories of press were coined keeping the special needs of the developing countries in mind, while the democratic participant theory talks about the audience's participation in the media processes. The development communication theory, as the name indicates, takes media as a tool for development. Similarly, Hallen and Mancini identified three models. The liberal model found in US, Britain, Canada, Ireland, Australia, and New Zealand. The polarized model found in Italy, Spain, and France to an extent, and the democratic corporatist model found in Scandinavia and Central European states. Interestingly, there are only 4 major international news agencies headquarters in UK, USA, and France hold approximately 80% of the international news market and thus control the worldwide flow of information. Broadly based on the liberation theory or liberal Western model of absolute freedom of collection and dissemination of news without interference from any country, these news agencies, however, have been criticized for their biased and uneven coverage of world affairs. Role of major news agencies. The international or world news agencies, Reuters, AP, Associated Press, UPI, United Press International, and AFP, Agence France Presse, are the Western news agencies which are often criticized for being monopolistic and dominant. These agencies are in fact the pioneer of the field which occupied 90% of telegraph traffic by second half of 1860s along with commercial messages. The monopoly on communication network at that time resulted in huge profits and strengthening in the infrastructure of these international news agencies further. While describing the functioning of these news agencies, Hessian and Scotton in 2006 said, although they claim to cover the world, the agencies historically have tended to serve primarily their own national clients and those in their sphere of influence. That is, Reuters serviced British media and the British Commonwealth. AFP worked mainly for the French press and overseas French territories. And UPI, in its prime, in addition to its US clients, long had strong connections in Latin America. But these world agencies have become more international in scope, selling their services to whoever will buy, wherever they may be. The tendency to assess the importance of place and events on the basis of clientele by these agencies led to the uneven collection of news. Along with the home countries, few developed nations of political influence were given more emphasis to cover the stories, while rest were left out. It was argued that the developing countries or the so-called third world countries were given any reportage only at the time of acute crisis such as natural disasters, wars or coups. North-South news flow. The media monopoly continued even after the Second World War, the time when most of the colonies of the world got independence or were in the process of getting independence. Simultaneously, this period was also witnessing the technological development in communication field in the developed nations. While developing countries of the erstwhile colonial world were struggling hard to cope up with poverty, political instability and social ruptures. Developed world was strengthening its position in terms of communication networks further, while developing countries had little meaningful input into decisions about radio frequency allocations for satellite at a key meeting in Geneva in 1963. Intelsat, which was set up for international cooperation in satellite communication with 11 participating countries in 1964, was dominated by the United States. The flow of news among nations was growing thin with distorted realities of the world, where important events of the less countries were ignored or merely covered, noted the American media scholar Wilbur Schramm in 1964. These observations by the scholars laid the foundations of international news flow theory. A clear-cut demarcation was observed in collecting, processing and disseminating the news in northern and the southern part of the globe. The North-South news flow has often been related to the center-periphery model as well. This postulation is adopted from the Marxist tradition of looking at the imperialism as a cause of economic underdevelopment and resultant dependency of the less developed countries. To depict their structural relationship between these countries, the advanced developed world has been described as core or center, while the dependent developing countries are named as periphery. Free flow versus balanced flow. More than 5 decades have been passed. The debate regarding free flow versus the balanced flow is still on. Going back to Western model of press, here the scholars present the argument in favor of free flow of information as against the accusation of imbalanced news flow. According to them, free flow does not necessarily means a balanced or two-way flow of news, as desirable as they may be. They emphasize upon news from reliable and accurate sources as what needed for the readers and viewers all over, rather than the spatially even or two-way news flow. However, the profit-making free press was highly criticized on the part of the scholars who argued that the purported victims, which are the developing nations, have been raging bitterly over the news coverage of the events in their continent. They condemned the free flow of information as being not only unidirectional and vertical, from north to south, but also depicting a distorted picture of developing countries since the events were covered with Western perspective. Thus, the whole debate led towards the demand for two-way balanced news flow towards one equal global world. Demand for NWICO. Post-Second World War, on one hand, the developing countries were in the process of gaining freedom from colonization, and on the other hand, the world was started to observe the Cold War among two power blocs, that is USA and USSR. This Cold War atmosphere could well be felt in the field of communication exchange, where information and news was seen as just another commodity to be traded for profit, as also the tool for political propaganda. In this backdrop, following factors were the engines to raise the demand for New World Information and Communication Order, that is NWICO. The efforts towards self-reliance and development by the newly independent nations. The feeling of a de facto colonialism prevailing among developing nations regarding the Western media as a threat to their cultural and national identities. Studies of news flow conducted by UNESCO, United Nations Education, Scientific and Cultural Organization in 1953 and 1956, which identified the major Western news agencies as one of the vital factors in the flow of information. The effort to keep clear of the power blocs, which was resulted in the formation of the Non-Aligned Movement NAM in 1961 with 25 member countries. In 1970, the General Conference of UNESCO issued a call to examine communication policies and caught the attention of the West. However, it was the NAM Summit Conference in Algiers in 1973, where the idea of a non-aligned news pool established as Non-Aligned News Agencies Pool (NANAP) pushed the demand for NWICO strongly. It was made clear that the transformation of the international economic system required that non-aligned nations take concerted action in the field of mass communication in order to promote a greater interchange of ideas among themselves. Moreover, also known as New World Information Order (NWIO) or the New International Information Order (NIIO), it had been seen as a simultaneous move for the demand for new international economic order of 1974. The same concerns were put up in Tunis and New Delhi in 1976 by NAM. With the goal of a new, more just and more efficient world information and communication order, also agreed upon in the 1978 UNESCO and UN General Assembly resolutions, an international commission for the study of communication problems was established by UNESCO in 1977 under the leadership of Irish diplomat Sean McBride and membership of prominent media personages from varying national and ideological backgrounds. Following were the broad objective: to study the problems in the fields of communication and information while taking account of the diversity of socio-economic conditions and levels and types of development of various countries; to pay particular attention to problems relating to the free and balanced flow of information in the world in accordance with the specific needs of developing countries; to analyze communication problems in their different aspects within the perspective of the establishment of a new international economic order and of the measures to be taken to foster the institution of a new world information order; to define the role which communication might play in making public opinion aware of the major problems besetting the world, in sensitizing it to these problems and helping gradually to solve them by concerted action at the national and international levels. McBride Commission published its report with the title Many Voices, One World in 1980 as a text but not a consensus, and the report uneven style reflects its mosaic character. For instance, the report highlighted the defects in the prevailing system of international news flow, particularly related to the neglect or distorted coverage of the activities of NAM. While seeing some problems in the kinds of news distributed by the transnational agencies, the report, however, appreciated those to provide reliable news. The report stressed upon effort to establish a truly two-way flow of news by international agencies at one hand, and on the other highlighted the responsibility both for failure to use diverse sources and for distorting acts of gatekeeping as lies with local editors. Although the dominant country like China refused to be a part of the commission, USA and UK saw the report as a threat to their political position and condemned it against the free press policy, and many basic issues related to the demand for NWICO were remained unresolved. However, the Commission's report resulted in some improvements in terms of the coverage of NAM countries in Western media, technological exchange, training and development aid to the journalists of developing countries. More efforts were made in this direction throughout the 1980s. Nature of transnational news flow at present. After a decade of McBride Commission, an increase in the capacity building of developing nations in the volume of communication flows and exchange between countries with different economic and social systems had been observed. Today, when democracy is seen as the most humanistic, suitable political system, Journalists in many nations increasingly support and practice the Western concept. However, this could not decrease the pessimism related to the use of media for racial discrimination, propaganda and vestiges of the colonial domination in the media of the Third World. Rather, there was less news flow from South post-Cold War and even lesser post. Due to advent of new technology and financial cost cutting, the foreign news is limited to few events. This practice leads towards parachute journalism with declining coverage and follow-ups of foreign affairs on one hand, and also resulted in a special breed of glamorous foreign correspondents. The other trend among the international media organization is hiring stringers in the developing countries. They argue for it to be more economic and better in terms of reporting from staffers familiar with the space. However, by hiring stringers, they do not keep a regular serious connection with these countries. For example, the sub-Saharan Africa, except South Africa, continues to be the least reported region. Following are the patterns of transnational news flows. Homogenization of news. Media conglomerates and ownership concentration in the globalized world has led to the vertical expansion of transnational media with few big media players or media barons, particularly Rupert Murdoch of Australia, Britain and America, Silvio Berlusconi of Italy, Time Warner, Disney Company and Viacom of the United States. Murdoch's media acquisition have apparently influenced several major US media mergers, all of which have had implications for the future of international communications. News diversity as well as media credibility has declined in absence of independent voices and due to political economy of news media. English as a homogenized language has also been seen by few scholars as a factor of less diversity in news. Notably, 6 of the world's biggest broadcasters, the BBC, CBS, NBC, ABC, CNN and CBC are English-based. Infotainment. It has been observed that foreign news in various media is reduced to tabloidism and junk news, which is only meant to entertain rather than inform, the dumbing down discourse, again with the vertical flow gets momentum. Dayatusu in 2007 argues that infotainment may have an important ideological role, a diversion in which soft news masks the hard realities of the new liberal imperialism. Alternative media. The alternative media, including some newspapers, channels and online media, through working on development communication and democratic participant theories, are creating a contraflow from south to west and also fulfilling the need of a balanced flow of information at home. The Doha-based satellite channel Al Jazeera is one of such examples. As Robin Wright of the Washington Post reported, Al Jazeera's popularity has given rise to 100 satellite channels in the region. Together, they are called the most dynamic force for political change in the Middle East. They offer a locus for the Arab street to vent, formulate and discuss public affairs. With an increased penetration and engagement, Internet has provided the world of interactive news media to the developing countries. A few optimistic observers believe these communication flows may lead to more open and possibly democratic societies. Summary. You have learnt the development of transnational news flow and its association with various historical stages, beginning with the colonialization based on the postulation of normative press theories. The transnational news flow has been criticized for being uneven and vertical from north to South. It led to the demand for NWICO with a balanced transnational news flow, and MacBridge Commission was set up by UNESCO. Since then, media of more countries are adopting Western model with profit making in mind, and little has been done to achieve balanced flow of information. Nevertheless, alternative media and online media platforms provide a ray of hope. So please do attempt the question in the self-evaluate quadrant. For further reading suggestions, please refer to the third quadrant. Thank you.